Diolch am ymuno ni yng Nghanadledd Cenedlaethol Seren 2018. Ewch yn bellach. Thank you for joining us in the Seren National Conference 2018, Above and Beyond. Dyma sesiwn. This is session Cynorthwyo gyda Ceisiadau Cystadleuol I Prifysgol, Supporting Competitive Applications University.
My name is Steve Minney. My job role is I'm head of undergraduate recruitment at Swansea University. I'm a first-generation higher education participant myself. I was born in Aberfan. Many of you will know that name, obviously. The events that you all know there happened a small number of years before I was born, but certainly my family was very much part of what happened there. So I was very much a widening participation entrant to higher education. And for us, certainly, higher education itself was a massive priority, as it is for many families in Wales, and obviously I know that's the case. So there's part of me that always kind of raises an eyebrow at the idea that somehow aspirations are a little bit low in Wales, and we should do a little bit more about that, because that's never been my experience necessarily. But obviously, diversity is the thing. I've been asked to say a relatively short notice to talk about supporting competitive application. So I think within the original program, there was a slightly different title and speaker, but I'm really happy to come. This is my third year at the event itself, and as an institution, we're strong supporters of the Seren hubs. The network, I think, is a tremendous initiative. I'm trying to get my head at the moment around how we'll support the demand that I assume there'll be when we extend it to younger age groups. But I think that's a great idea and a really necessary measure, as long as we get the identification right at the start of the program. I think that's a really key thing. Is there obviously a large number of learners here over these 3 days, but there are a large number that aren't as well. So providing for them is just as important, really. Right, I imagine throughout the day, if you've spoken to many of the candidates, I can see there are some very experienced people in the room, so a lot of you will probably have more experience of UCAS maybe even than I've got. But many universities talk about seeking the best candidates for their specific subjects. And they don't necessarily define what that means. It's quite slippery at times. They talk about seeking those with the potential to make, to thrive most effectively within their environments. They talk about seeking the best physicists, the best biologists. And as a starting point, really, this one. I just think it's important, really, that we sort of recognize that what that actually means is that, they're talking about cognitive intelligence in large part. We're talking about scores and grades and marks, and intelligence is obviously far broader than that. Emotional intelligence is obviously increasingly important. It seems to me that as a nation right now, we're in the situation we are, in part because we don't necessarily have political leaders with empathy. Those are skills that we need to teach young people. And cognitive intelligence doesn't necessarily increase or measure those. So I think that in itself is fairly important then. If I can just, sorry, a sec. Apologies. I know I'm not changing anything on the screen. Right. I mean, you as educators, there's a really clear link between the idea. We built a narrative fairly successfully that somehow education equals success in qualifications. And education is obviously far bigger than that. But we've let that narrative take hold. And a lot of the students here today will feel tremendous pressure, I imagine, over the next 18 months to achieve the grades that are in our prospectuses downstairs, to get the UMS marks, to prep for UK CAT, for all of those things. For me, then, preparing students is about more than that. We are trying to prepare them for a lifetime of learning. We're definitely trying to prepare them to thrive within higher education. But more than that, it's about the skills that we enable them to develop within these institutions they're competing for a place at. So that's important. So I say some of the things I think are important are there in those bullet points. We're trying to develop learners with the capacity to grow and keep changing and be comfortable with change in the future. And that's a really tough skill for many people of any age, really. It's really important that the students here today, some of them will graduate as early as 2023. As I say there, by the 2030s, they'll be shaping our society and our public policy. The skills they'll need then are difficult to comprehend right now, given the challenges that we face. It sounds very apocalyptic, this, but we really feel like a civilization right on the edge right now. And to this generation, we need them. So to me, the fact of the matter of how many A stars they get, what their UMS is, what work experience they have. Those things are slightly less important than what it is we're teaching them and what they're learning. And I think the most switched on institutions and schemes are beginning to focus on that, but we still, I think, have an obsession with grades. So that in itself is a bit of a problem. Right, and what differentiates applicants, and you're supporting people who will be applying in extremely competitive situations. In some cases, they could be competing with 15 to 20 applicants for every available place. Some very broad categories, really. Obviously, predicted grades and reference, that's a key thing. That differentiates between applicants. I'm going to focus on that immediately after this. Resilience, everyone talks about that. What does it mean? Generally, it means failing and coming back from that. And a lot of the learners, I suspect within the sharing cohort, that'll be a new experience for them in the relatively near future. And it'll be uncomfortable for quite a few of them as well. Curiosity, interest in the subject, fairly obvious. And there are various ways that we can assess and test that. Difficult thing to teach, but there are learning behaviors we can encourage. I'll come to that towards the end of what I'm going to say. Right, predictions themselves. I was at an event at UCAS 2 weeks ago now, so they haven't published these yet. I'm probably not supposed to show them, and I didn't realize there was someone from UCAS next door, which is a mild problem. But the UCAS have done a very large study of all predictions made over the last 6 years, essentially. So what this shows is a divergence over time between prediction and actual achievement. So that may or may not be a surprise, but you can see the red line there as time increases, as we move towards 2018. To the right-hand side of that graph, predictions have gradually increased over time. Achievement, the gray line, has fallen. So the gap between the two has widened slightly during that period. So the average over that time is an increase of half an A-level point in terms of prediction and a decrease of 0.2 points in terms of achieved grades. That hasn't necessarily mattered an enormous amount to many universities and maybe hasn't affected destinations for a lot of those students because we've been experiencing something that hit you a number of years earlier, a fairly pronounced demographic decline. However, the application rate amongst 18-year-olds has increased during that time in the UK, so that's offset that slightly. But there's been a lot more flexibility at universities, and you'll be aware of this if you're signing off application forms and dealing with results day and confirmation. Lots more flexibility right around the sector over the last 6 years, since a cold, hard market was created in higher education with tuition fees. So that happened. Advisors overall are optimists. You're all optimists. So this graph shows, oh, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. This graph shows that per school, the average prediction for 2018 entry, so a very small number, we're bang on. 0 over prediction there. A larger number of schools over-predicted by 1 grade, and as you can see, the largest number there, over 1,000 schools, are over-predicting by 2 grades per candidate. All sorts of reasons why this happens, and it changes accordingly. But say on average, most schools are over-predicting by 2 to 3 A-level points per student. So, yep. Yep. So obviously not not a huge range necessarily. Yeah. Yeah. They are about to publish this, as far as I know. Right, how does that play out? So this may or may not be surprising again. Generally speaking, the higher the grade a student is predicted, the evidence suggests the more likely they are to achieve it, essentially. So those predicted A star, it's very close. As you travel down the grade range, you start to get far more fluctuation and far more divergence between the two, and that's fairly standard. Now, very controversial topic, really, and I'm really interested in this, is prior performance the best indicator of future success? That suggests it is, ultimately, and in many cases, I've spoken to lots of schools about this, who talk about the fact that essentially, the students that achieve at the higher end at GCSE, on the whole, progress reasonably smoothly, end up being predicted strong post-16 performance and get there, ultimately. The variation really starts to become more pronounced when average grades at GCSE are B or below, which is not surprising, I guess, but so it's fairly pronounced lower down. Right, what happens when predictions aren't accurate? And this graph, I think, really does show what's happened with the market within higher education over time. With an average over-prediction of 2.5 in 2012, you can see what happened to insurance acceptance. So far more people are being accepted via insurance by 2018. The firm choice students, so those enrolled through firm choice, the red line at the bottom there, the average over-prediction for those students who ended up being accepted by their first choice institutions, the over-prediction was just over 1 point in 2012 and it had risen to 1.5 by 2018, which correlates with the overall picture that I just talked about. Quite interesting that clearing acceptance have a smaller over-prediction than those who end up through insurance. So what that means, obviously, is those who are accepted by the insurance choices, there's enormous amounts of flexibility being afforded there, clearly. 3 A-level points, and they're all still being accepted by those institutions. That's certainly true. Our annual intake, our intake has grown significantly over those 6 years. We've been admitting between 600 and 700 students as insurance candidates during that time, which is very high in the sector, I suspect. What that obviously means is other people are letting them go. So there's been less flexibility in those places for those schemes. Right, what are selective courses looking for? I mean, a lot of this is fairly obvious. They are looking for students with a broad range of subjects, in some cases relevant work experience. They're looking for people with a genuine interest in the subject, a wide range. They're looking for people who can push themselves, who'll be honest about their own effort, look to improve, not just think, well, I did it at GCSE, I'll concentrate again at the end of year 13 and it'll all be all right. Different learning behaviors certainly required. Independent learning, very easy thing to say, very difficult thing to demonstrate for candidates, certainly, but clearly one of the things that differentiates. Project-based qualification, I think increasingly an awareness right throughout the sector that Welsh Back Project, EPQ, is a tremendous bridge to higher education in terms of content, volume, style, negotiating your title, coming up with a methodology, your reading list, a literature review, all of those things, absolutely ideal skills, basically. We've now sort of fallen in line with a significant part of the sector, really, and we're happy. We've always considered Welsh Back to be one of the 3 grades that we accept for all courses and scholarships. We've now moved to a point where we're saying EPQ grade B or above, we're happy to reduce the 3rd grade by 1 in all subjects. So project-based qualification, I think, very strong itself. Extracurricular activity is important in some cases. I mean, it regards, I think, purely the well-being of the student more than anything. I don't think it gets you a place at university, but some balance is strong. Something I want to focus on a little bit is that, it's clearly really important that students are developing the non-cognitive skills, becoming strong in those areas, adjusting their learning behaviors as they move through in terms of the complexity of their studies, and that's really a crucial thing. Lots of students will say, oh, I'm just going to try harder, but they have no idea how to actually action that, and I think that's a really key thing. So there's some things I'll focus on in a sec about those non-cognitives. In supporting your applicants, I think it's important to recognize that certainly, well, I can speak, I guess, only firmly from my own institution's standpoint. We very much want the UCAS application to be a conversation. We don't want it to be a binary, submit the form, cross your fingers, hope for the best. If there's any point in the cycle where you have concerns about an applicant, if there's something that you don't understand that we've said or done, we'd want you to contact us immediately. Don't wait until results day. So we're happy to have those conversations right throughout the year, at any point, really. Now, when you're dealing with 130, 140 different universities, you will encounter different structures and different approaches in different places. Increasingly, the vast majority have centralized admissions decisions, so you won't necessarily be speaking to an academic or subject specialist, but it'll be a professional who deals with those forms every day and can escalate any academic question accordingly, or anything involving any health or social issue that a student may have. They'll know who in professional services to contact, so that'll be important. There are still a small number that are operating a decentralized system whereby it's someone who teaches is also dealing with all the forms. So a small number have a hybrid of the two. The majority have now moved to a centralized process, I suspect. But in communicating with the different application choices, I think it's important to know what that system is and know your audience. And most people will be really receptive. Every year I can sort of almost put it in my diary. I know who's going to call me at the end of May from which school with a list of candidates they're concerned about. And I'm happy for that to happen. And I think most people would be. But we don't necessarily, I think we're not great at advertising that fact. But we're really happy to do it, definitely. Because, I mean, in the end, the interest of the student is what we really care about. So I think that's important. Right, what the admissions tutors themselves will say, reference is the first thing I look at. That's what practically everyone will say. A reference, it's important to assess the reference itself. We use it to assess whether an applicant has what it takes to succeed on my course, suitably vague and slippery that. Admission staff say it's useful if within the reference academic skills are described, and it's useful in particular if it's not a standard applicant, if there's a strange choice of A-levels, there's been a false start, something of that description. We're seeing more and more applicants presenting a mixed portfolio of qualifications, and that's perfectly, I think that's great, because I think breadth and diversity are good things. That applicants themselves are often confused because our prospectuses don't necessarily speak their language when they present that kind of mixture of qualifications. And what ends up happening is they have a bespoke individual offer that they'll get and no one else will, because that's their qualification mixture. Right, the supporting reference itself, for many of you, I mean, the process of compiling it will obviously vary enormously according to where you're working right now. Commonly, it's a team effort. That usually works very well. Individual subject teachers know their students very well, will be able to talk in detail about their progress in that subject. Commonly, there will be an editor, one designated UCAS referee, who pulls the entire thing together, signs it off, and sends them. And I imagine you're all very busy at the moment, if that's your job, and things will come to a head in the very near future. Just a quick aside on that, really. I mean, we are averaging around about 20,000 applications a year at the moment. It's terrifying, really. I know full well right now 4,000 applications will arrive after January the 1st, between the 1st and the 15th. It's amazing. Every single year students do it. So they put pressure on themselves. We attempt to turn those applications around very quickly. In January, we just can't do that, as you may imagine. So there's the obvious link there. A reference ideally will be linked to the personal statement. It'll be specific to the course, not necessarily the university that person's applying for, obviously. And the same things apply, as it says there, as regards to statements. So the content's important. Vague, empty statements don't really support anyone. So different ways to approach it, really. The extenuating circumstances, all sorts of things, life happens to all of our students. Personally, my attitude is it's best included within the UCAS form. Obviously, there may be a significant volume of material that you need to pass on, in which case it's obviously fine to do that separately. As much detail as possible is useful, and wherever I think wherever is reasonable, we will make allowances regards achievement itself, any support students need in transition. All of that is, it is really important. So it isn't just about grades. I think I started off by saying that, and that is absolutely key. And so we'd want to know that early. We do have lots of students arriving with undeclared issues, situations, ailments in some cases, and it's not the end of the world, but it's just slightly more problematic than it need be if information is available earlier. So you're obviously reliant on student consent to declare some things, but the more information we have, the greater chance we have of being able to support the student from our end. I think that's important as well. Right, the reference itself, academic content, as I say, that's the large part of the reference. If you can encourage subject teachers to basically treat it almost like a personal statement, I think, and end up writing basically twice as much as you need, you'll then, as if you're an editor, have time to have opportunity and space to edit and distill to find the most relevant information within that. So I think that's key. If you are an editor, if you are compiling references, I mean, in some cases, some of you may be doing the entire thing on your own. I'm aware of that. But if you are an editor, it's important then list the most relevant subject first, have more detail about that than the others. As I've said, my attitude certainly is that a project-based qualification is more important, as far as I'm concerned, than a third subject. Doesn't mean I don't care about the third subject, but a project-based qualification I think is tremendously valuable, and we'd want students to talk about it within their form, and there's definitely scope for you to do that within a reference as well. So no problem. Academic potential, fairly obvious, I suppose, but all institutions will be interested in this very sort of mysterious term. What's the student's potential to succeed on our scheme at our institution? So we want to know something about motivation, their capacity for independent study. And obviously we completely understand you're going to be positive and optimistic and talk them up and give them every opportunity to achieve. I mean, that's where we're coming from as well, I think, as a sector. Certainly as an institution. So can they think critically, argue? Can they present their information in writing, in person? Are they problem solvers? What's their trajectory, ultimately? Increasingly, I think institutions interested in the idea that you rank your students, possibly within the reference. I'm not necessarily saying this is the best student I have this year or the best student I've ever had in this subject, but I'm aware of a number of institutions who are now, and schools actually, who are talking in terms of quintiles. Their students in the top quintile for this subject, or even ranking that over a period of time. You will have absolute superstars. There's no question. Will tell us. We'd love to know. Suitability for course is just a couple of quick and obvious things, really. If someone's interested in a language, have they visited the country? I guess you're looking for opportunities to convey the information that they maybe have within the personal statement, and to reinforce and support that in some cases. So within science and engineering, maths is obviously crucial. We have strong and flourishing foundation programs with great outcomes. Maths is almost always the reason why people access those schemes. So we just need to know with that one. Anything health related, relevant work experience, obviously they'll need to sell that, but opportunities for you to do so too. So different things you can say about each subject. I think the slides will be available afterwards. If not, my email address is at the end, and I'm happy to send any of this out to anyone too. Right. I talked a little bit about non-cognitive skills. We had a teacher conference in July. It's possibly not the greatest time of year for some of you to get out. Our HE conference is slightly different to some of the others because we don't really talk about personal statements and references, and we're not really selling our subjects. We genuinely want it to be a day where we talk about learning, education, supporting students, theories and research within the sector right now. Our keynote speaker this year wrote this book, which I think is one of the best resources I've seen in a very long time about managing achievement and excellence among students. So there's also a GCSE version. I'm not on commission from Steve Oakes and Martin Griffin, but this book is essentially filled with activities that can help develop the non-cognitive skills and behaviors which students need in order to succeed. So there's a model. The two of them are very successful co-heads of sixth form at a large sixth form centre in Oldham. Years of research and testing and refining have developed a whole suite of activities which you can deliver very quickly and easily in schools and colleges. They're also happy to come and speak to management, to staff. Essentially, I asked them to come to our conference because I'd seen one of them speak elsewhere, and it just seemed to crystallize a lot of things that I've always felt about education but never been able to express necessarily, which is that these behaviors can be managed and changed. Many of you will have students who right now are high achievers without necessarily trying that hard in their own. They may feel like they are, certainly, but the step to year 12 for some of them will have been steep. The step to year 13 for others will be much steeper. Not much doubt about that. So this book, this model, I find very powerful. The different elements of it. Sorry. 5 elements. It's the model itself, everything has to have an acronym, is called VESPA. So vision, what's the student's goal? Do they have a solid, do they have a solid goal? Is it that they just want to get to the best course they can find, whatever that may be? Do they define success in terms of salary, management opportunity? Do they have an actual goal regards society itself? Those are very different things, clearly. Effort, how many independent, the effort itself, I'd say lots of students feel like they're working hard. So within their research, Steve Oakes, Martin Griffin, essentially have determined that the most successful students, those that get A stars and A's at the end of their post-16 studies, are pursuing, and can anyone guess? So how many hours of independent study per week are those students doing outside of school? Anyone? What would you say? 24. If we said that to the students who are here today, they'd be absolutely horrified and think, "What? That's abuse? What are you talking about?" That's what those students do. So people's definition of effort can be quite different. Systems, you'll all recognize that some of the more successful students are the one with gigantic bags, ring binders with multicolored tabs. They're very well organized. You can spot them a mile off. Practice, past papers is clearly the thing. I have one O-level. I did O-level maths a year early. My school was quite famous for it. Every single person got an A for something like 12 years in a row, because every lunchtime from January on, we did a past paper. And it was really hard work, but I love maths as a result of it. Attitudes, this was about resilience. Setbacks, how do you respond to that? You either try harder or you quit forever. And there aren't many other options, really. So I said that model itself, there's a huge range of stuff that goes into it. So very quickly, I've probably got about a minute left, sorry. In terms of achieving progress, as I say, this idea that intelligence is, that cognitive intelligence dominates everything, and that we can measure progress, and I'm a chair of school governors. I'm extremely interested in our school data. But the idea that students just gradually improve and there's a fairly straight line over time, well, this study by Michael Treadway sort of really demonstrates the truth around that, because, again, an enormous study of cohort after cohort demonstrated that the percentage of students who follow the expected pathways, who follow those graphs over time, can anyone guess that one? How many students basically do exactly what we expect of them, meet their levels consistently right throughout their studies? There are some. It's 9%. It's 9%. So as universities, I think we don't do a very good job of recognizing that. People learn at different pace, at different times. I think I've always known that. I became acutely aware of it when my son was born in mid-July, as you may imagine. Every year, every autumn is a mild struggle. Come February, every year, his name's Clement. Every year, February comes and we say it's Clem time, because he's caught up and in fact he moves ahead. But year on year, that's going to be the challenge for him, certainly. So let's say it's recognizing that is the key. I love this graph. I show it to students all the time. They all feel like everyone else is the person at the top who's on this smooth, serene pathway of progress. Everything is going great. And the reality is that everyone is struggling at different times. They overcome all sorts of problems. Life happens to them. In some cases, they do everything they think they should have done, and they don't get the grade or the mark they should have, and they get really frustrated by that. And things can feel complicated to some of the students. Some of the students here today will fly into some of the most competitive universities. And for many of them, it'll feel like it's just a natural thing for them to do. Others will have to develop some of the skills, the non-cognitive skills, to cope with setbacks and hurdles and obstacles on the way. So that's absolute reality itself. Really key thing, I think, is all of this support that you're giving your students, the support we're ready to give them. There is a problem here right now, so I'm sure it's a focus of the event, and it's something you're all thinking about. But right now, we have a system where achievement is pretty close to the highest level it's ever been. Certainly the opportunities to access higher education, there have never been more opportunities than there are today. Yet somewhere between a quarter and a third of all school leavers at some point are experiencing some sort of mental health ailment, difficulty, or problem. So, what are we doing? There's a question of the pressure we're creating here, even though this opportunity exists, is tremendous. And I think we just need to rethink that a little bit. Right, that's possibly a slightly different set of slides and observations than you may have expected. But as I said, to me, it's really important that we're in the business of educating people, as are you, and while they're very interested in their grades and their eventual destination, the person and their well-being is to me paramount, and I think that's absolutely key. Right, that's me. If you've got any questions, then please get in touch anytime.